What's up guys, this is Nephis here, and today we're going to be talking about a question that pops up for me quite a bit on my stream and on my YouTube videos, especially when I'm tanking. And that question is usually, hey Nephis, how much resistances do I need on my PvE tank for this content, that content, whatever content? And usually the answer I give is kind of like vague, I guess, for the people asking the questions. I just say it's not really important. And of course this confuses people who are getting into PvE tanking for the first time ever, because obviously as a tank you would think damage mitigation is important just as much as your max stats are. And a lot of people ask, well, isn't asking how much resistance you need as a tank akin to asking how much healing a healer needs to do or how much DPS a class needs to do? Yes and no, but I'll be explaining in this video exactly how resistances basically work. I'll be explaining the minimum you will need for trials and dungeons from years and years of experience of tanking pretty much everything under the sun so far in ESO. And I'll be explaining a couple other interesting facts about resistances and why things are what they are. So first things first, it's pretty self-explanatory here. We got spell resistance and physical resistance, and these two categories obviously mitigate different sources of damage, such as magic-based damage for spell resistance, and physical resistance is for, like physical damage. And there's of course subcategories under these two categories a lot of people sort of forget about. So under spell resistance, we have resistances against lightning damage, ice damage, fire damage, whatever that's magic based. And under physical you have poison based damage, and of course there's always like different manners of damage incoming. It could be a dot, it could be a direct damage like a heavy attack from a boss or a light attack from a boss, it could be a mechanic. Regardless, these two resistances are pretty important for different kinds of content. Now the max cap is not really a hard cap, and by that I mean you can go over the limit, but in PvE there's usually no point in getting close or even over the limit of the spell resistance and physical resistance. And I guess it's thundering out there, someone's angry at me. So the resistance cap for both the spell and physical resistance is 33,000, and that's confirmed. And there's actually a pretty great forum thread by Paul Simon Ops, if you guys are interested in checking out my video description, basically going over the very basics of mitigation, or resistances in this case, for ESO, and there's math behind it if you guys are interested in that sort of thing too. Basically, to sum it up, 33,000 physical and spell resistance is the cap. And the cap isn't really important to get to as a PvE tank, and the reason being is there's so many other sources of mitigation, from passives, champion points, and other things that you really don't need to get to the cap. You don't need 33,000 resistances, and the reason why it's 33,000 resistances is because the game calculates the damage mitigation from resistances from 0% up to 50%. So 50% damage mitigation against anything is going to be your limit as a tank. You cannot go 60 or 100% damage mitigation as a tank. The 50% is the hard stop, and that's pretty much why it's 33,000, because 660 mitigation or 660 resistance amounts to 1% mitigation roughly, and that's pretty important when you look at CP if you need to decide how many points you're exactly putting to heavy armor focus or light armor focus or whatever, because as you can see here, it doesn't give you percentage, it gives you a flat value. So like right here, this is going to be 2% mitigation right here, 660 times 2, that's like 1320, right? So that's pretty important to know this, especially when you're allocating your CP as well. However, again, there's another huge reason why resistance cap is not really important to get to. A lot of people also underestimate this, and it's block. Blocking in this game gives an additional 50% damage mitigation, and just add that on top of the damage shields, the minor protection, major protection, the champion points you have in terms of mitigation, like against damage over time, direct damage, and even more into physical based and magic based damage resistance. It's pretty insane, to the point where you don't need to get to 33,000 resistances. And that's pretty much it. That's pretty much the simple gist of it. Now, I'm going to be answering the next question pretty simply as well. What should my minimum CP be, or excuse me, what should my minimum resistances be as a tank? I would suggest at least 24,000 for everything. I'm not talking about just dungeons or Craglorn trials, normal or vet. I'm talking about everything. 24,000 spell resistance, 24,000 physical resistance, depending on the content you're doing, is going to be your absolute minimum as a tank. It's pretty easy to get to with little to no effort. You can get it. You can get there pretty easily with either CP or heavy armor passives or whatever. But it's really not necessary to stress about the resistances once you meet the minimum of 24,000, at least in my opinion, because at that point, it's basically about you learning to manage the fight in terms of both mechanics and damage output. So really, it doesn't really matter after you get 24,000, in my opinion. But obviously, there's going to be a comfort zone for a lot of tanks out there. It's obviously not just going to be a minimum of 24,000. I personally like being between 24 to 26,000. Sometimes I usually, depending on the specs and such and the build, I usually get over 27 and 28,000. But anything beyond 27, 28,000 and past that, you usually don't really see any significant differences between those numbers and the lower numbers in terms of damage mitigation. So that's pretty much it. That is the general answer to all these questions about resistances, or how much resistances you need as a PvE tank, regardless of whether it's Cloud Arrest Hard Mode or Fungal Grotto 1 or whatever. 24,000 is the minimum, in my opinion. That should be comfortable for most content, and a little over that can be better for even harder content. But anything above, in my opinion, 28,000 or even getting closer to 33,000 resistances, definitely not needed. Definitely don't need to allocate more champion points towards it. And I forgot to touch upon another reason why max resistance is not important. So in PvP, I know a lot of people have been telling me, hey, well, resistance is pretty important in PvP. People use 3-piece protective under jewelry so they can go all out damage, sure, but in PvE, you don't really get debuffed to the point your armor is reduced. Yes, there are some ads in certain dungeons or content that will debuff you with the typical major breach or major fracture, but beyond that, there really isn't anything to debuff your armor. And the hardest content, such as Maw of Lorcage or Sunspire, they don't reduce your armor. They completely shatter you. They completely get rid of your armor. So the two-handers in V-Maw and Naviantas's Mark of Death in Sunspire, hard mode or non-hard mode, those just completely get rid of your resistances for the most part. And that is another reason. I mean, no matter how much you stack, no matter if you're close to the cap of your resistances, shatter mechanics just kind of make that redundant. Like, it just kind of makes it useless. And so that's an additional reason why the cap resistances is not that important and not to stress over it too much. But yeah, that is pretty much it, guys. And thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys learned a few interesting facts about resistances. And as always, stay safe, have fun, and see you next time.